American, Caribbean, and Iberian Studies program, and want to welcome you to our lecture today. You probably heard the coffee percolating in the back, but please feel free to have coffee. There's hot water for tea and some snacks back there. Also on this table here in the corner, we have some information about some of the other events we're co-sponsoring, as well as a list of the rest of our lectures for our lunchtime lecture series this semester. And then there's a clipboard where you're welcome to put your email address if you're not already on our listserv. We'd love to have you add that. And it looks like our speaker, Carlos, just left a few handouts there as well. So thanks so much for coming, and I'll turn it over to Alberto Vargas to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Sarah. And my name is Alberto Vargas. I'm the Associate Director of the program, and it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Carlos Arenas, who's a lawyer. He studied law at the Universidad Nacional de Colombia, and he has a master's in legal institutions and a master's in law from University of Wisconsin-Madison, from here around. Carlos has many years of experience working in human rights. He worked for ILSA, the Instituto Latinoamericano.
When I was there, it was Instituto Latinoamericano de Servicios Legales Alternativos. Instituto Latinoamericano por una sociedad y un derecho alternativo.
Yeah. And also for the Wisconsin Coordinating Council in Nicaragua, that later become
Working Capital for Community Needs.
That's right, he was the associate director there, and Carlos has been working recently for Displacement Solutions. And if you have been paying attention to the news and the message that Pope Francis has been delivering about climate change and the impacts of climate change, his talk is directly related to that situation. So welcome, Carlos. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Alberto. Thank you.
Medellín o Colombia? Bogotá.
Santander.
Santander.
Where I'm from?
Ah.
San Gil, Santander, Colombia. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I would like to start apologizing for all the grammar mistakes that you will hear in my presentation, my strong accent, and on top of that, my cold. So please forgive me if I need to use some Kleenex at some point. Okay, so I am doing this presentation on behalf of this organization, an international organization called Displacement Solutions. It's one of the few international organizations currently working on climate displacement issues. The organization has been around for around 8 years. Is legally based in Geneva, but the people that work for Displacement Solutions are all around. The director is based in Australia, and other people in the UK and in Geneva as well. So I would like to start with the outline of the presentation. So I will start with a short summary of the what happened in Gramalote. That if you allow me, I will use the expression the Gramalote case. And then why the Gramalote case is important for Displacement Solution, why we were interested to learn about that. Look at the big picture, the topic of human mobility and climate change. Then a short overview of the events of La Niña 2010-2011 and the responses of the Colombian government. And then we will focus on the Gramalote case and try to see what lessons we can learn from that plan relocation process, and then move to some conclusions. This is the town of Gramalote before the before the destruction of town. So you can see main structures, the church of San Rafael with 2 towers and a dome, and the college, the school of Las Hermanas Belemitas, the Belemitas nuns. So in year 2010-2011, La Niña, that is the wet phase of this phenomenon. El Niño is a dry phenomenon. We are currently in some part of of Latin America, including Colombia, suffering for El Niño, and La Niña is the wet phase of that phenomenon. So that event produced extreme rain and caused an unprecedented level of disaster in Colombia. The rain started around June 2010 and it ended around May 2011. So Colombia didn't have that year a dry season. So that created a lot of problems, especially flooding all around, and because most of the population in Colombia live in cities and towns located in the mountain ranges, there were a lot of landslides, avalanches, etc. So Gramalote is a town located in the department of Norte de Santander. This is here in the map. So you can see Colombia, Norte de Santander, northeast part of the country in the border with Venezuela. And the town of Gramalote is here in red in the middle. So it's a municipality in the middle of the department, and this is the capital of the Norte de Santander, the city of Cúcuta. So the town was totally destroyed by what we could call a perfect storm, a combination of factors that were triggered by extreme rain of La Niña. So that extreme rain, as I said, triggered a set of events, including a landslide and a rare mass movement, or some people call a rotational slide, which, coupled with a small-scale earthquake in the area, resulted in the destruction of the town. So what happened in Gramalote was not, it was a landslide that covered, or started as a landslide, started with extreme rain. Then it was a landslide that covered one neighborhood. But it didn't produce any casualty. People were able to move out for some reason. And then the town started to move slowly down. So we will see some pictures later of what how the town looked at the moment of the destruction. So on September 17, the population was evacuated to nearby towns and cities. The Colombian government promised to rebuild Gramalote and promised that the Gramaloteros would be better off after that fact. President Santos visited Gramalote a few days after the disaster and made that promise to Gramaloteros. So the relocation of Gramalote have proven to be a very complex enterprise. The construction just started 5 months ago. The population of Gramalote is still displaced and waiting to be relocated to the new town once it is ready. So why this case is important for displacement solution? Displacement solution has been working on climate displacement issues in several parts of the world, especially focusing on issues related to sea level rise in small islands in the Pacific, Vanuatu, Kiribati, Papua New Guinea, and other places, and Bangladesh. Last year, we conducted a study on one case, a first case in Latin America, in Panama, in the Cunayala region, where the Cuna island communities are facing the problem that they will have to relocate in the coming decades as a result of sea level rise. I did a presentation of that case actually around a year ago, here in this same place. A detailed analysis of the relocation of Gramalote provides a timely opportunity to learn some lessons about the specific of a relocation process caused by a climate-related event. So there are not many cases of relocation, and we really wanted to look at this case and see what we could learn from that. We also saw the need for more studies about the impacts of those events of La Niña 2010-2011 in Colombia, and about the relocation process in Gramalote. Unfortunately, there had not been many studies on that despite the interest on the topic. Also, we were interested to look and learn from the patterns of population, of how the population of Gramalote moved after the disaster. So especially because Gramalote is located in an area that is located only 49 kilometers or 34.4 miles of an international border of the city of Cucuta. That is the most dynamic international border between Colombia and Venezuela. So we thought that that fact offered an excellent opportunity to examine the movement patterns of the population of Gramalote and see how many people were displaced internally and how many has crossed an international border, and the reason for that, for that movement. And finally, we also thought that the situation in Colombia offered an opportunity to test some international standards on climate displacement topics. So the big picture, the topic of human mobility and climate change. So most of the literature kind of summarize that there are three main environmental factors that impact human mobility. In the second column have hurricanes, typhoons, cyclones, tropical storms, heavy rains and floods. The next one, droughts and desertification and sea level rise. And the time frame for each one is different. And the hurricanes and storms, the impacts are sudden. The drought and desertification are less sudden, and sea level rise is slow outset impacts. So the main problem with the main characteristic of those environmental impacts for the second column, the increased intensity and frequency. For droughts and desertification, the loss of ecosystem services like food, water, and in the case of sea level rise, the loss of land, and obviously including the loss of other ecosystem services. The patterns of human mobility are different in each one. And the second column, mostly short-term internal displacement. For droughts and desertification, there are more dynamic patterns of mobility, but mainly short distances. And for sea level rise, migration or displacement, but also allows progressive and planned relocation in general. So, also some variables to understand that human mobility that might be connected to environmental factors. So in terms of duration of that human mobility, short-term patterns of mobility are considered to be currently predominant, and I follow all those graphics a lot on the work on Piguet. In terms of distance, short distance patterns of mobility are currently predominant. Regarding types, if internal or cross-border, internal mobility patterns are predominant now. There is a public fear that cross-border migration will be predominant, but that is not. There is not evidence that that is happening. The famous image of some people wrongly call environmental refugees, and the nature of that movement, if it's forced or voluntary, this is obviously an extremely difficult distinction to make, and also a lot of authors have highlighted that migration is not only reactive, but also a proactive strategy of a lot of people. And the Cancun adaptation framework consider in that regard adaptation, migration as an adaptation strategy. So the key concept in all this is the topic of multicausality. There is a complexity in the relation between environmental factors and human mobility. And climate change is only one factor among several others in explaining those human mobility dynamics. So identifying the primary cause of why people move is probably impossible, as all causes might reinforce each other. So that is important to keep in mind for the things that we'll see next. So if we look how this topic of human mobility has been addressed in the IPCC reports, for instance, in the latest one, it has a paragraph where highlight how climate change is projected to increase the displacement of people throughout this century. So this first sentence tells us about the prediction, and the second sentence tells us about the correlation between displacement and social vulnerability. So if we look at the same topic now at the UNFCCC level, we find that it is mentioned under two different frameworks. The first one under the adaptation framework, the Cancun adaptation framework. A paragraph mentioned this for the first time in 2012. I highlighted in red the part that I want to emphasize. So the Cancun adaptation framework called to increase understanding, coordination and cooperation on those topics of climate change-induced displacement, migration, and planned relocation. And in 2012, under the Doha decision number 3, under the loss and damage mechanism, this topic is mentioned once again, talking about the importance of patterns of migration, displacement, and human mobility. So those references in the at the UNFCCC level promoted or encouraged the development of different type of initiatives to deal with this issue. I think that we could summarize 3 main ones that have been out there since 2012. The first one is the called Nansen Initiative. The focus of this is cross-border displacement in the context of disasters and climate change, and has been promoted by the government of Norway and Switzerland. And main objective is to develop a protection agenda for cross-border displacement in the context, on this context. The second one, the Peninsula Principles, that has been focused on climate displacement within states, promoted by Displacement Solution, and this has been a grassroots effort. And the main objective has been to set up protection and assistance principles to be applied to climate displaced persons. As part of that, of this view and this work of Displacement Solution, the document that I pass around is one product of that kind of effort. And there's another one. Other groups are working on a guidance on planned relocation. This focus on relocation between national borders. And this has been a think tank-led initiative, especially promoted by the Brookings Institution in DC. And the idea is to protect people from impacts of disaster and environmental change, including climate change. So we go back to the causality problem. As Miguel has said, discussing multi-causality therefore implies acknowledging the non-direct relationship between climate change and migration and the factors that mediate within the two. So multi-causality in practice has created an unresolved academic and policy dilemma on how to call, define, and address the human mobility problem enhanced by climate change. There is no consensus on this matter, and there are several different initiatives competing to be adopted. So if we go back to look at the 3 initiatives that I just mentioned, we find that each one use a different name, like the Nancy Initiative prefer to talk about disaster displacement, the Peninsula Principles about climate displacement, and the other one is a little different because it's a little more narrow, but so because it's focused on plan relocation. But in terms of the subject, the Nancy Initiative talk about the cross-border disaster displaced person, the Peninsula Principles about climate displaced person, and the other one about a relocated person. And I don't want to read the definition, but it is there. So how this what has happened at the policy level? So if we look at how the topic of human mobility has appeared in the draft for the Paris Agreement, we find that, first of all, the first draft was released or appeared or elaborated in Lima, at the meeting in Lima at the end of last year at the COP20, and include this issue, this reference to climate change, the creation of a climate change coordination, climate change displacement coordination facility. So several drafts has been done. This is the latest one on June 2015. Talk about this. This is the first time that, like I have not seen any academic paper talking or using this term, climate change displacement coordination facility. And one of the ideas is that we will assist in providing organized migration and planned relocation. According to media reports, the idea of creating this climate change displacement facility was supported by the negotiators from developed and developing countries in the latest meeting in Bonn at the end of last month, beginning of September. And a new draft will be released in a few days on October 4th. And that will be the draft that will be used at the meeting in Paris. And this last meeting of the negotiators will be in October, before Paris, will be on between October 19th and the 23rd. So, according to the official summary, the discussion of this latest meeting in Bonn, it was mentioned that the G77 and China, that are the main promoters of this climate change displacement facility, they will spell out what they have in mind with that. So in a few days, probably we will learn, and the negotiators will see if this will be included. But so that to show that this topic or this reference to climate change, climate displacement, and climate displaced person could be part of included in the Paris Agreement. One last issue that I want to mention before focusing in the Colombian case is the issue of displacement and resettlement. If we will talk about relocation, so there is a very strong body of literature on this topic that we could summarize it, and that has been developed on three main areas. The color in the middle, the development of forced displacement and resettlement, was the kind of pioneer studies on this topic. The work of Ted Scudder on dams in Africa and other parts of the world, and the work of several others, sociologists and anthropologists, mostly, especially Michael Charney from the World Bank, and the creation of his impoverishment risk and reconstruction model, and other authors has worked on that. That has not only been an academic framework, but also they, because of the problem that this type of displacement and the relocation, the impact, the extensive impact on human beings worldwide, so move them to advocate for guidelines or protection principles, and those authors, especially Michael Charney and others, push for the World Bank to develop guidelines on resettlement. And the work of the World Commission on Dams in year 2000 was also important. In terms of disaster-induced displacement and resettlement, there is also some specificities to that type of displacement and resettlement, and the pioneer work of Professor Anthony Oliver Smith in Peru in the 1970s after the destruction of Yungay. And there have been others. And in terms of protection, since 2005, with the Hyogo framework for disaster risk reduction, that set some kind of guidelines or ideas of how this could be addressed, and that was renewed in the city of Sendai this year. And finally, conflict-related displacement, I will say that that is a field that is newer. Perhaps it started with, we could say that it started with the work done by some academics at the Brooklyn Institute, Roberta Cohen and Francis Deng, that allowed the creation, the drafting of the UN Guiding Principles on Internal Displacement. That has been a very important document in the field, and the creation of the Special Repertoire on Internal Displacement. The first special repertoire was Francis Deng, and there has been two other ones, and one who is a very important author in this topic, Professor Walter Kalin, and the current one, a person from Zambia, Charoka Bejani. So the idea is so that the relocation could learn obviously from what has been done and say, and the models developed in other areas. So, but the question is, we want to see if maybe there is some specificities in this type of displacement as a result of climate change and the relocation. Okay, so let's go back to the Colombian case. So the overview of the events of La Niña, I already mentioned some of them. So it was known as a multi-hazard event, produced mostly floods, around 55% of the emergencies, and followed by landslides and windstorms. The area flooded by La Niña during that year was around 2.4 million hectares of land, and it affected around 3.2 million Colombians, or 77% of the Colombian population. And the events impacted around 1,000 municipalities out of 1,100 municipalities in Colombia, and the damage was valued in around $6 billion. 5 sectors were more impacted. Housing was the main one, 38%. Transportation followed that, then energy, education, and agriculture and livestock. The Colombian government developed a special institutional architecture to face the emergency, because it was obvious during the events, in the middle of the events, that the institutions that were there were not only overwhelmed, they didn't have the capacity to respond to this type of this level of damage. So they decided to create, to make changes as the disaster was unfolding, and they created the national the National Calamities Fund that existed at that moment, was transformed in what was called Colombia Humanitaria, and the Colombian government invested almost $3 billion in an emergency and rehabilitation phase of that emergency. And then they created something called Fondo.
Colombia. Bogotá.
Santander.
Santander.
Where I'm from,
Ah.
San Gil, Santander, Colombia. Thank you everyone for being here. I would like to start apologizing for all the grammar mistakes that you will hear in my presentation, my strong accent, and on top of that, my cold. So please forgive me if I need to use some Kleenex at some point. Okay, so I am doing this presentation on behalf of this organization, an international organization for displacement solutions. It's one of the few international organizations currently working on climate displacement issues. The organization has been around for around 8 years, is legally based in Geneva, but the people that work for displacement solutions are all around. The director is based in Australia, and other people in the UK and
in legal institutions and a master's in law from University of Wisconsin-Madison, from here around. Carlos has many years of experience working in human rights. He worked for ILSA, the Instituto Latinoamericano.
When I was there, it was Instituto Latinoamericano de Servicios Legales Alternativos. Instituto Latinoamericano por una sociedad y un derecho alternativo.
Yeah. And also for the Wisconsin Coordinating Council in Nicaragua, that later become
Working Capital for Community Needs.
That's right, he was the associate director there, and Carlos has been working recently for displacement solutions. And if you have been paying attention to the news and the message that Pope Francis has been delivering about climate change and the impacts of climate change, his talk is directly related to that situation. So welcome, Carlos. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Alberto. Thank you,
Medellín.
and Geneva as well. So I would like to start with the outline of the presentation. So I will start with a short summary of the what happened in Gramalote. That if you allow me, I will use the expression the Gramalote case, and then why the Gramalote case is important for displacement solution. Why we were interested to learn about that. Look at the big picture, the topic of human mobility and climate change. Then a short overview of the events of La Niña 2010-2011 and the responses of the Colombian government. And then we will focus on the Gramalote case and try to see what lessons we can learn from that plan relocation process, and then move to some conclusions. This is the town of Gramalote before the destruction of town. So you can see main structures, the church of San Rafael with 2 towers and a dome, and the college, the school of Las Hermanas Belemitas, the Belemitas nuns. So in year 2010-2011, La Niña, that is the wet phase of this phenomenon. El Niño is a dry phenomenon. We are currently in some part of Latin America, including Colombia, suffering for El Niño, and La Niña is the wet phase of that phenomenon. So that event produced extreme rain and caused an unprecedented level of disaster in Colombia. The rain started around June 2010 and it ended around May 2011. So Colombia didn't have that year a dry season. So that created a lot of problems, especially flooding all around, and because most of the population in Colombia live in cities and towns located in the mountain ranges. There were
American Caribbean and Iberian Studies program, and want to welcome you to our lecture today. You probably heard the coffee percolating in the back, but please feel free to have coffee, there's hot water for tea, and some snacks back there. Also on this table here in the corner, we have some information about some of the other events we're co-sponsoring, as well as a list of the rest of our lectures for our lunchtime lecture series this semester. And then there's a clipboard where you're welcome to put your email address if you're not already on our listserv. We'd love to have you add that. And it looks like our speaker, Carlos, just left a few handouts there as well. So thanks so much for coming, and I'll turn it over to Alberto Vargas to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Sarah. And my name is Alberto Vargas. I'm the Associate Director of the program, and it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Carlos Arenas, who's a lawyer. He studied law at the Universidad Nacional de Colombia, and he has a master's